Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Project Egg Show. Today, we are interviewing Alex Branning from Southern California. How the heck are you, Alex?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Ben.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for coming on to the show. So, I want to know, what is your story?
Yeah, great question. So, I from my school age years, I was homeschooled, which really built up this self-motivation, self-learning. And when I was about 15, one of my homeschooling buddies was like, "Hey, my dad is going to teach me how to code. Would you like to learn how to program as well?" And this was back in the mid 90s, so the internet was just a whisper. We didn't really know what was up. And so I started learning programming. It took me to just a love of it. I got a job doing it at 16, started my business at 17, and I just took off, man. So I've been doing the Branning group since I was 17 years old, and I've loved it. So this is my 18th year in business. I am now a full-fledged marketing agency with team members all over America. But that's the short, condensed version of my story to where I am now.
So, let's go back through, and I really want to unpack that story of yours. So, when you were younger, how was the decision made to go the homeschooling route? Maybe you could talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah. So my parents, my dad worked for a military contractor. And so in the early stages of their relationship, they were moving around, and they were like, let's give him some consistency. Let's homeschool when we're first getting started, right? From like kindergarten to first grade. And then we just kind of stuck with it, and they gave me the opportunity. They're like, "Do you want to go to school?" When I would just entered high school, and I was like, "No, I'd rather just get my GED and be done with it and go to college," And so, yeah, that's kind of how it all kind of came about. So the homeschooling came out they wanted to give me consistency with things that were happening, and my mom was a military brat growing up, and so she was bouncing around all over the world, Hawaii, Germany, etc. And one of her biggest things was it was so hard for her to get stability when where she was at, during the bulk of her day was always changing and shifting. You know what I'm saying? So like she had a good home life, but other than that, her schooling was just kind of all over the place depending on where she was in the world.
So it seems like there was a lot of military influence in your family, or there
Yes.
is a lot of military influence. Can you talk about how that may have played an integral role in your development and your view of the world?
Yeah. So my dad was an HR working for a military contractor. So we were not in the military per se. But on my mom's side of things, my grandpa was a captain in the Navy. My uncle, he retired as a captain in the Navy. Pretty much all of her siblings went into the Navy. And so the Navy was a huge role on my mom's side. And it instilled in her discipline, really good at, keeping on schedule per se, right? Like having these standards for life, right? Whether it's cleanliness, punctuality, etc., respect, the way you talk to people. And so she instilled that in me and my sister, even though we were not technically in the military. And so it had a big impact on myself when it came to things like deadlines, which was big in my entrepreneurial journey. The way I talked to people and honored authority, that was big. And she instilled that in me. And so it definitely, it had like this generational, impact from what my grandpa did down to his kids and his grandkids.
So you mentioned discipline. You're talking about how that has really been integral in your journey. Can you talk a little bit about what that actually looks like? And maybe you could talk about it from the perspective of your own life and really how it has impacted you and how you actually practice it.
Yeah, I think discipline is one of the key ingredients in being a successful entrepreneur. Because when you're at the head of the company, no one's telling you what to do. And so that self-discipline is so important in making sure that you make the right decisions every day. So for me, growing up, not only did I get the discipline instilled and just treating people well, making sure that my word was my bond, but also as a homeschooler, my mom gave me a lot of freedom. And so she was like, here's the schoolwork you got to get done today. Once it's done, you can go play with your friends. And so that sort of like get the job done, then you can do the other thing you want to do, created a pattern for myself so that when I did, the work, when I got the work done, then I was able to go do the fun stuff. And so now as an entrepreneur, I see that still, that I can kind of like play those psychological games on myself, right? It's like, all right, once I go over the bookkeeping, which I really don't want to do, but once I do that, then I'll give myself this reward afterwards. So that the discipline has helped a lot. I wrote a really good book about this, Ben. It was the 4 Disciplines of Execution. I forget the author's name, but he broke that down too. And that helped me kind of hone in my own self-discipline and how I grade myself on a daily basis for what I should be doing.
It's interesting. I think you read my mind, because I was about to ask, how would somebody else, if they didn't have that sort of role model, like I believe you said your mother was to you, to really help instill that discipline, how could somebody else achieve that level of discipline in their life? And it seems like you may have already answered that question. Are there any other things that you might recommend in addition to that?
There's another book by David Allen called Getting Things Done. And David's book talks a lot about cleanliness, order in the office, because the physical manifestation of your office is oftentimes a direct representation of the cleanliness in your mind and your clarity that you have. And so when I read that book, it really clicked in a lot of ways. So it helped me get a little bit more disciplined about the cleanliness in my office, and also the schedule that I have for my day. So that helped a lot, because when I was younger, I had to hurry up and get it done so I can go do the other stuff. Well, that's great as an entrepreneur, but also there's also something to be said for being able to put in a full 8 hours, right? So so David's book really helped kind of set some things straight in my head about just the number of hours we got to put in on a daily basis. So it was good, man. So I would say 4 Disciplines of Execution, getting things done.
So you mentioned that being in a homeschool environment, you had a lot of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think, and if yes, can you please expand upon, do you think that freedom impacted you and helped to shape your belief of the world and your belief system?
Absolutely. Being able to identify, my mom let me pick different subjects that I wanted to study outside of the core curriculum, right? So it was like, here's the core things we're learning this year, and then what's something else you want to learn, right? So, and she would give me options, like it wasn't a free for all, but being able to kind of pick and choose what I wanted to learn helped me to discover a love of learning. Because then I got to look forward to, like, that's the one subject that I got to kind of pick, And so, like, when I was learning programming when I was younger, that was like my thing that I got to pick. It was like, do you want to learn coding with me? And I had already had that pattern of I get to pick what I want to learn on top of the core stuff. So I was excited to do that. But yeah, it definitely shaped my belief system. Mostly about the ability for us to learn things that we want to learn. I think one of the struggles entrepreneurs have, I also coach other business owners, and one of the things that I hear a lot is I don't know how to do that, right? And so we all start from that place of not knowing how to do it. It's a matter of us getting the self-discipline, the motivation, and the persistence to learn some of those things that we have to learn on our journey to become the people and business owners that we want to become.
I think that's a beautiful point of the end goal is to become the person that you want to develop into and that you aspire to be. I think that's a beautiful message. So I still want to keep talking a little bit about your childhood. I know we went on a little bit of a tangent.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you talked about how when you were in that homeschool environment, you really developed a love of learning, and I believe the term you used was self-learning. That I've heard that a few times now. Can you talk about what exactly that means for you, and how do you learn most effectively?
Yeah. So for me, I'm always on, especially being in the marketing world. If you're a marketer, you gotta just kind of accept that things are always going to be shifting and changing. You have to be learning something, right? Like the new thing in just the past couple of years is chatbots, right? So it's like before when people were talking about it, I dismiss it, like that's stupid, no one's going to like it, right? Now that it's becoming more mainstream, it's like, oh crap, we got to actually learn how to do this because our clients are demanding it. So, but how do we learn using the chatbot example? How do we learn that, right? So, for me, what I choose to do now now that I'm where I'm at is I like to hire someone to teach me. Like, it's like, I want to hire a teacher, hire a coach, buy the course. And then I set aside time. I set aside time every week to learn things that, in my opinion, are going to help me reach the goals that I have for myself. And so, and that discipline to set aside time to learn, I believe really started in my childhood, right? It's like you have these hours, learn, and then go do. And so as an entrepreneur, with many other responsibilities outside of running a business, like being a husband and a dad, I still set aside time on a weekly basis to learn. And that's really impacted me, not only the success that I've had, but it's also helped me when I want to study things that aren't necessarily fun, like team building and learning to manage people and things that did not come naturally to me. I had to learn it, or else I wouldn't be able to get where I wanted to go.
So when you are going about and finding that coach or mentor to teach you what you need to know, what are some of the mechanisms that you use to vet those people, right? Because when we are opening ourselves up to receiving information and to learning, I mean, intellectually, in a way, we're allowing ourselves to be vulnerable with another human being. And so, if you have too much of the wrong input, it could be pretty detrimental. So how do you really go about vetting the people and deciding who you want to learn from?
Yeah, good question. So when it comes to, like, let's just use the chatbot example. I hire someone to teach me who I see is already successful in that arena, and that has results that they can demonstrate. So it's not just someone that can teach me, it's someone that's doing it. So that's how I learn for specific marketing things or specific tools that I need. When it comes to an overall, and so they have very little voice in my life. In other words, like they're teaching me that one thing, right? When it comes to vetting a life coach or a business coach, someone who can really speak into many areas of my life, I go, do I want to be that person, right? Because they're going to only teach me what they know and who they've become, right? So it's like, do I want to be like them? If I don't, then I don't hire them, or I just limit their voice into my life. Some of the greatest experiences that I've had come from finding a really good mentor to help me kind of, pull me up to their level.
So I love that idea of having those two very clear distinctions of somebody who's going to teach the specific skill, and then somebody who's more of a generalist who has a lot of different areas of expertise and of knowledge. I think that's a beautiful distinction there. So let's now talk about motivation, right? Because in the earlier parts of the interview, I believe you said that along with self-learning, self-motivation and just motivation in general was very pervasive in that experience. Can you talk about the role that has played in your life?
Yeah. I think all of us are motivated by the pain that we experience or the pain that we have, right? So maybe it's a pain of not having enough money to buy the thing we want. That motivates us to go out and make more money. One of the things I struggled with last year was actually finding motivation, because there's been, I've reached a point where like I'm making the money I want to make. I could always go for more, right? But I had reached my goal. I have a great family life. And so I was like, gosh, what motivates me to wake up every single morning and go through the kind of the drudgery of some days of running a business? Some days are fun, some days aren't, right? So for me, I had to find that motivation and kind of play games with myself to get me motivated to wake up every day and do what it is that I do. And so for me, what I found, Ben, is I found my motivation right now has been, I had to switch it from business goals to more personal goals right now, because the business is rocking. It could always grow bigger, and we're still growing. We doubled the team in the last few months, which is exciting. But now it's about personal stuff, and so right now what I'm focusing on for my motivation is being the best leader that I can be, learning to become the best entrepreneur that I can be, and not just business owner, but like, entrepreneur as a whole, and really discovering what do I want to do with the rest of my life. I've been an entrepreneur now for half of my life. I started when I was 17. I'm 30. I just turned 35 a few days ago at the recording of this interview. And I got, let's say I live to 85. I got another 50 years. What do I want to do for the next 50 years? And I had to really look at myself and go, what is this it, or what do I want? And so I had to motivate myself and looking into the future and imagining myself 10 years from now and going, what do I want my life to look like when I wake up out of bed when I'm 45, and then work towards that goal.
Again, I think that is an amazing way to look at it. There are these different segments of our lives, right? There's the business side, the professional side. One of my mentors actually told me that it's very helpful to look at your life in 7 core disciplines of financial, industrial, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, physical, and I'm leaving one out, relational. So
yeah.
So there's so many different ways to look at it, and each can have their own goals, but to really dig deep and figure out which one is truly going to motivate me, that to me is very powerful. So when you were doing that, what process did you go through to really dig deep? Like, how did you truly drill down into what was important to you?
Yeah, I wrote out, my wife loves to make a dream board for us as a family every year. And I looked at that dream board and I was like, is there anything on here that I haven't accomplished yet that I wanted to in 2018? And there was a couple small things, but overall it was like a whole bunch of check boxes, right? And then I looked at it and I was like, that I could add more stuff business-wise, but we're on a really good path. So I don't want to, you don't want to break something by trying to, go faster on the railroad track, right? So then I looked at myself, kind of like what you listed 7 core disciplines. I looked at 4 for myself. I looked at my business. I'm very happy with where it's at. I looked at my family. I'm very happy with where it's at. I looked at myself, relationally. And I was like, I got to do better. I gotta be a better friend to people, because I was failing in that area. And then I looked at my spiritual life, and I was like, I can definitely do better here. And so, I've shifted my goals and my priorities for those 2 things, friends and my spiritual life. And so I've noticed a huge impact in the past few months. And some of it's been uncomfortable, as I've started to change what I prioritize, because as an entrepreneur, I get a lot of joy in checking boxes and, seeing bank accounts rise and all that fun stuff, right? But, when you're dealing with, because like the friend stuff and the spiritual stuff, really, they're both personal growth, right? Like when you become a better friend, you open yourself up to just being a friend. When you're going after your own spiritual health, it's a lot of inward looking, as like, who am I as a person? And so the more that I went into those two areas, the more uncomfortable it was. But it was good, right? So as far as to answer your question about motivation, what I've looked at is, what kind of, because I couldn't look at myself and find motivation to become a better person, just being honest with you, Ben, right? It's like I can look at myself and go like, I'm happy with what I have around me, so this is good. But then I look at my daughter and I'm like, what kind of example am I setting for her, right? And so, because she can look at me and go, Dad's got a great business, Dad's got X, Y, and Z, but Dad doesn't have any close friends, so I guess dads don't have that. I guess husbands don't have that, right? And so I don't want to set that example for, I don't want that to be normal. And so, that's one of the ways I find my motivation to keep growing as a person in these areas where I saw myself lacking.
That's extremely interesting. That is a really cool way to look at it. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah.
I know we are getting a bit on the personal side, and
yeah, it's all good, man.
but I really do think that we, behind every great entrepreneur, we're all people, so yeah. I think everything does matter and everything does play a role in everything else that we do. So let's jump back now into your 16-year-old journey. Can you maybe tell us more of the story, or give us the full story on how you really got into programming and how you felt during that time, what that really looked like for you?
Yeah, so when I was 16, I was looking for challenges. My mom pushed me to get into athletics, and I realized pretty quick I was decent, but I was never going to be, a superstar athlete, right? And so, and I was completely fine with that. I was like, well, this isn't really for me, So, I was a good swimmer. I loved it, but it just wasn't my thing, right? So I was like, well, what do I want to do? And I wasn't pushing myself to figure it out. I was just kind of like, let me try some things and see what I like, I knew I definitely didn't want to be like my dad. I love my dad, but I didn't want to be behind a desk all the time, right? And so I was like, that's not me. And so when I was introduced to programming, the thing I loved about it was that I got to create something with my own hands, because I'm not really artistic. But I got to create something, and I dug the process of being able to try to figure all this stuff out. And so I started by programming, and then my parents divorced when I was 15. So when I was learning programming, they were splitting up. And so when I was 17, I met my mom's boyfriend's son, who was also a programmer. And he was like, hey, I'm trying this thing. It's called Visual Basic, and you can code and then people can see it on the internet. And until that time, for that year or so that I was learning programming, if you wanted to see what I created, I had to give you a disk, right? And to say, install this, hit the alex.exe button, right? And you can see what I built, right? So this is old school. I'm aging myself with this, right? So when he was like, check this out, you can program and people can see it, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And at the time, the internet and all that just seemed like this whole other thing that wasn't attainable. And he was like, look how easy this is. And it just lit a fire in me. And I was like, I need to learn how to do this. So I just dove in. I was obsessed with learning how to code on the internet. I didn't really have a goal of this is what I want to build. I just wanted to learn. And so when I was learning that, at the time, Craigslist was a lot different. And so it was this new thing, you could post stuff, and it wasn't, right now it went to a period of time where it was a little bit sleazier, and now it's more commercialized. But anyway, back then it was this brand new thing. It was a great way to connect. So I would make posts and say, PHP programmer for hire, because PHP was a computer language that I was learning at the time. And so I was able to get a bunch of work that way, man. And so I was like, this is amazing. I'm working 20 hours a week, making $3,000, and for a 17-year-old, that might have as well been $1 million. I had no bills, so $3,000 to play money a month, and I just loved it. And so I got hired by people all over America, small businesses that are build this one small thing, build this one small thing, and it was cool. So So that was me, man. I was like 18 and I did that. It was just me getting work and, filling the queue from the time I was 18 to about 20. And then I realized that I was not good at selling and I didn't know how to learn how to sell. And so I talked to my dad and I was like, I need to learn how to sell if I'm going to grow beyond just me coding. You know what I'm saying? Like now that I was 20, I was like, I kind of want to look at buying a house and all this, but $4,000 a month, it was great for play money and buying nice cars and all that, but it wasn't good for buying a house. And so I knew I needed to make more, but I didn't know how to make more. And so he was like, well, learn from somebody who's doing it, which is great advice. I still use that today, right? So I got a job as a car salesman under one of the biggest car dealerships in my town down there because I wanted to learn how to sell and I didn't know how else to do it. So I was a car salesman for 6 months, still programming. And I learned quick and I just started crushing it as a car salesman. And it was fun. So that took me on my journey, man. So after about a few months, I was like, all right, I'm out. Thanks. And I went back to doing my thing. And, that was the next step of my entrepreneurial journey. And that ingrained, like, if you don't know how to do it, find someone who does, learn from them. And then now you have that skill for the rest of your life.
So when you were developing the knowledge of coding or the skill of coding, it almost seems like you were kind of self-taught in that arena.
Sort of. I mean, I did have somebody holding my hand at the beginning, showing me the constructs of code and how to build a good foundation. And that was my friend's dad, who was teaching both of us. He had been programming since like the 70s, like old school. And so he really helped me understand the building blocks of code. And then from there, I was able to learn other computer languages. It's kind of like if someone's going to teach you the basics of this, like just speaking languages, it's a lot easier for you to take that knowledge and learn Spanish, Italian, and the other languages that kind of build on the same constructs. Computer programming is a similar thing. It's like once you understand kind of how they all talk to each other, then at that point it's just syntax and learning what keywords and such to use to build the code that you need to build. So he really helped my hand. He really helped my hand in that.
That makes a lot of sense. When you did maybe like did you have a point where you kind of stepped away from that instruction and you went more on your own and as far as the learning development goes, and at that point how did you really learn the new stuff? I guess what I'm getting at is like how did you teach yourself those new things without really the close instruction of that individual?
Yeah, so I took his instruction and then I bought books. I bought books like crazy. And follow the examples. And then, me and my programming buddies, we just give each other challenges, like, build something that does this. And it was like pointless, but it was just like, here's the next step, like try to build something that does this, and, so we just kept pushing each other to get better and better and better.
And then when you went to work as a car salesman for those few months, what were some of the key lessons? Like what fundamentals of selling did you learn there?
Yeah. How to get people to trust me, that have never met me before. Because before I learned sales, what I would try to do was show that I knew what I could help them by talking technical. And person who was looking to hire a programmer did not care that I knew PHP, right? They didn't care that I could speak it to them. They just cared, can you do it, right? So when I was a car salesman, I learned to just be a conversationalist, learn what they wanted, and then tell them how you can give them what they want. And so it was a very valuable experience. I built on my sales knowledge since then, but the biggest thing that I got was just how to be a good conversationalist. I think a lot of sales come from just being human and saying, what's your problem? And then here's one way that I can help you. And that's a lot of sales. I mean, and so that's what I learned from them. So it was very valuable to me. And it also pushed me in in a lot of ways, because I'm talking to a lot of strangers, and I'll be honest with you, I did not know cars then. I do not know cars now. And so they would ask me questions about, like, does this have a 5.7 liter, blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, good question. Let me read the paper on the side of the car here. And they'd be like, you don't know car sales? And I'm like, I know how to solve your car problem, but I don't know the interior of what's inside the engine. And he was like, huh, okay. And I was like, and I'm a really good negotiator with my boss, so I can get you the best deal. And they're like, sweet. So it helped a lot, man. It was an interesting experience. I won't do it again, but it was interesting.
So when you moved out of that position, what sort of transformation did you see in your programming coding business?
I was able to talk to people because I would get calls on a regular basis asking for me to hire them. And I didn't know how to talk to people really well, and so but now that I had this knowledge in my toolbox, I was able to communicate with people on a whole different level. And I was a lot more comfortable with it because I'd been forced to talk to people, and so I was able to not only get more jobs, but then because I learned negotiation, I was able to command much higher prices for the projects that I was doing.
And where were you on your journey at that point? You were probably about 21, 22.
Yeah, I was 20. By the time it was all in the year that I was 20. So I'd been in business for about 2 years. And I knew that I hit a ceiling. And so I was like, how can I break through this ceiling? And so, I can look back and go, man, my income literally doubled just from me going and learning sales. It was, I was making probably 36 to 40, something like that a year, part-time, kind of farting around. And then after the sales experience, I was consistently making 75 to 80, and I never looked back since then.
So what actually happened after that point? You have these new sales skills. You've really come into your own as a programmer. You start making a lot more money. Where'd you go from there?
So I realized I had a pretty sweet opportunity ahead of me, because at that point, Ben, what I was looking at was like, how do I pay my bills, have fun, hang out with my friends, buy the car that I want, And then I looked at it and I was like, I was 20, about to turn 21, looking at my life, my business, my skills, and going, I really have an opportunity here that a lot of my friends don't have, because they haven't found something they love that pays them well. A lot of them were going to school, and I was like, I should really kind of hit the gas on this and take this to the next level. And so I started learning a lot more, trying to make connections locally, because I didn't have an entrepreneur family. I didn't have an entrepreneur community around me of friends and family. So I was really just kind of trying to build this whole thing on my own without knowing, okay, what steps do I take? I was like a blind man in the dark, And so one of the things that I took a detour when I was 22 that really set me up for success, and that is I met my now wife. And so so I was 21, just kind of trying to fumble through this. I was making a lot of money, but not knowing where I wanted to go, really. I just knew, I was like, I want to make more, and let me try to advertise differently, and ask for referrals. And I didn't really know what I was doing, but it was working, but I didn't really know what I was doing. And then I met my wife, and we were in a long distance relationship. So I met her when I was in California. She was in Chicago. And after about 6 months of having a long distance relationship, I was like, I do not like this. I want to go to Chicago. So I went there, and she had a full-time job. And so she was like, well, during the time that I'm gone, you can either do your thing, or you can get a job, and then we can just, all kind of drive to work together and all this. And I'm like, sounds like it'd be a funner experience for me and a better way to get acclimated if I just I did the 9-to-5 thing for a minute, and I'll just keep my clients on the side and handle them at night and on the weekends, And so I got a job, and that was just an eye-opening experience for me, for my programming wise, because everything I had learned was self-taught, right? And so But when you do it when you learn something like that from a book, it's an entirely different experience when you get into the real world. And so when I got into that job and they were programming in ways that I had never, done before, at levels that I had never pushed myself to learn. My programming knowledge went from like a second grade level. That's really what it was. I went from like a second grade level to like an eighth grade level. I was like a junior high programmer in the programming world, right? So, and then we got married. So my wife and I, we met in January of that year. We got married in November, and we ended up moving back to Southern California as Mr. and Mrs. And I got a job opportunity when I moved back to work with the guys that had built MySpace. And it was like a really good paying opportunity. And so it let me like almost immediately buy a house. And I was like, okay, cool. I'll take this and see where it goes. And I'll tell you what, Ben, I learned that what I was doing was these guys were masters at code. And I felt like not only was I going to work every day, but I was going to school every day on top of that because these guys were teaching me so much. And before, what I was doing was just building these, small, simple applications. They built MySpace, right? They were building these massive platforms. And when the project ended that they hired me for, I got quickly scooped up by another company. And then when that was done, I was like, I'm building my own social networks. So I went from going for a couple $100 a job to $25,000, $30,000 a job. And like, it was a game changer. So, it was cool, man. It was cool. So I did that I built social networks for a few years. It opened a lot of doors for me that would not have been opened. We built social networks for celebrities. At the time, there was a lot of these little bitty social networks that were popping up, right? It was like, they have one and they have one. And so, we built one for, some TV stars, and it was cool stuff. I was meeting a lot of really cool people and getting paid a lot of money. But then we worked for Chrysler, and it was fun, man. It was cool. So the Branning group it exploded with this new knowledge that I got from working with those guys.
So when you were moving up from, and I loved how you put it, you said you're at the second grade level, and then you jumped to the eighth grade level, and then it was like going to school and going to work at the same time. What was the difference, right? So maybe you could shed some insight into like the difference between a second grade coding experience and an eighth grade, and then it seems like that one was maybe the
second grader. Yeah, the second grade programmer in me was like looking at Legos and saying, I'm going to build a Lego house, right? I'm going to I see your foundation. I'm going to add a couple pieces here. What I learned from the guys at MySpace is they really, before they wrote a single line of code, they wrote out the blueprint for everything that needed to happen. And they were addressing problems before they became problems. And I was just like, thinking about things from an entirely different level than I ever needed to prior, right? Because I never needed to even consider some of these things because the stuff I was building was used by just a couple hundred people. The stuff they were building and I was helping them build was used by, 1 million people a month, right? So it's just the scale just had to be so much bigger. So you had to think about things differently. And then I took that knowledge and applied it to every single thing that I ever did, right? So because then I was able to solve a lot of the problems for my clients that I had before they ever became problems, and they loved it. So it was a whole different experience, though, man. A whole new way of thinking.
You've talked a lot about how when you went and worked with other companies who were established and they were just doing things in a different way, that was a lot of the growth. That explained a lot of the growth, or it gave you the opportunity to where you could then go and achieve that growth yourself. For an entrepreneur, how would you advise them to either stick with what they're doing only, or go and work with / for somebody else, or maybe do some hybrid of both? Like, how would you recommend that they go about making those decisions of whether to go solo their own route or to go work with a bigger company and learn from them?
Yeah. Look at where you want to be in 5 or 10 years and ask yourself, can I get there on this track, or do I have to go and learn from somebody who's already doing it and then go back and start my own thing? A lot of times we, as entrepreneurs, we try to get in a hurry. It's like, I need to get here and I need to get here fast. And then we listen to influencers and gurus who talk all about that as a motivational tool. They talk about bootstrapping and going for it and being persistent. And there's wisdom in that. But at the end of the day, there's only so many things that you can learn from a book or that you can learn from a podcast, right? Sometimes you have to learn how to create an environment or a business by being inside of that environment or business to then duplicate it. And so, there's no shame in taking a job temporarily, right? If that's going to help get you to where you want to go. So, I was talking to a coaching client recently, and she was shocked when she was like, what do you think I should do now? And I said, because she was just reaching this impasse in her business. And I said, if I were you, I would go get a job at the biggest, because she was trying to start a social media firm. I would get a job at the biggest social media agency in your town and learn how they built it and then duplicate it in a year. She's like, what? You want me to get a job? I'm like, you're not going to figure it out trying to, on your current track, it ain't working, And so go find someone who's doing your thing, learn from them, and then build it. Life is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so, you might quote unquote lose a year in your business, but how many years are you going to be leapfrogging ahead of your competition now that you can actually duplicate systems that are working?
I think that's an amazing point of, yeah, it might take you a little bit longer in the short run to start making that progress, and you might have to help others make progress on their goals, but what you gain in the person that you become, that will help, like you said, leapfrog you ahead for when you do go back, and you can bring over a lot of the lessons and systems and concepts from that other entity. I think that's a brilliant idea. So, as all this is happening, I believe you said earlier that now. Well, let me just ask. So that's what you have been doing. That we covered your past pretty intensely. Can you talk about what you're doing now and what your biggest focuses are?
Yeah. So after we were building all those social networks and having fun, I reached a point of severe burnout and anxiety about 5 years ago, where I was like, this is when I built the Branning group. This is not what I envisioned. I was working long hours. I had a team, and it was difficult. And we were doing projects that looked great on a website, right? It's like worked for ... all these big names, but I was no longer having fun. And I was like, I need to change what I'm doing. And so I went on I just started reading business books by people that I was recommended to, right? And so one of them I picked up was a book called The System by Eric Lofholm, and he was talking about sales systems and building a business, and it really resonated with me, the way that he communicated. And so I reached out to him and I said, hey man, I love your book, thanks. And he responded and said, hey, let's jump on a coaching call. And that took me on a journey, Ben, of working with him over a 3-year period. I worked with Eric as a private business coaching client, and he helped me turn my business from a programming house that just built websites. And he said, you need to create a business where you get recurring residual revenue, because then a bad month happens, something goes awry, you have money coming in every single month that you can count on, depend on, and look at. And I was like, okay. And he's like, it's going to be a long, slow, journey while you kind of turn the ship. But once you get there, it's going to be a world of difference, and life's going to be amazing for you. And I was like, and I believed it. I saw it. I visualized it. And so I went on this path where I stopped taking I didn't stop, but I took less of the big paying jobs and spent more of my time and effort on the smaller things that could get me small increments of money on a regular basis. And so now, I say all that to say this, now we are a full-fledged marketing agency. So we still build websites, but nothing custom development. It's all using platforms that are already developed. We do a lot of paid ad campaigns like Facebook and Google, because the problem our clients need is they need the phone to ring. And so, yeah, so we have completely changed. And so I have a team of, we're growing like crazy right now, 9. And so we make a lot of content, we build chatbots, we do paid ads, and I have an expert on my team for each one of those areas. One of the things that inspired me as I was building my business, Ben, was the story of Andrew Carnegie. I don't know if you know the name, but he built one of the largest steel magnates ever, and he knew nothing about steel, right? He just found experts, and he was like, all right, you're on the team and you're doing this. You're on the team and you're doing that. And he built this mega, mega successful business in a certain area, not knowing about steel. Now, I know marketing, so that helps a lot. But what I found is that I don't need to be the expert. I can just hire the expert and have them do it, and they'll do a better job than if I try to learn it myself. So that's the company I'm building now. And it's fun, man. It's exciting.
And where do you see, so we talked about the past and what you're currently doing. Where do you see your business and yourself going in the next 5, 10, 20 some odd years?
It's so funny you bring that up, because I actually I signed up to go to a seminary program in 8 months from now. So in August, I am joining a part-time seminary. I'll be there for 4 days a week, 4 hours a day for 8 months. All about like identifying like, man, I'm not where I want to be spiritually. And so how do I fix it? Right. And so, I want to be at a place where I don't just have the Branning group, where I have multiple businesses. And I believe I have the time, the connections, and right now I have the Branning group and I have equity in a few other companies that are out there, and they're growing. So I'm at a really good place in that area. But I saw an opportunity to become a better me. And now's a great time for me to do seminary, because I have a team that can help run the Branning group, and these other companies are doing well. And so what do I see myself doing in 5 years? I see myself still having the Branning group, but also having these other companies that I'm a part of, that I'm able to help build. It's really hard for me to envision where I'm at in 5 years, because if you were to tell me that I'm right now, that I have a business that's doing as well as it is, and with all the revenue streams that we have, I don't think I would have predicted being where I'm at this stage, only having been doing this version of the business for 5 years. So I don't know where I see myself in 5 years, but I don't see myself as a business owner. I see myself more as an entrepreneur. I see myself turning into an investor. I don't know when that is though, but right now people exchange equity for my expertise and my knowledge and the connections that I have. So I don't know where I see myself, man. It's hard.
That's such an interesting perspective of, I know that, I'm doing so well in these areas, but this one area I'm not doing so hot. So let me just go directly at it, join, a seminary for an extended period of time. I think that's brilliant. I actually think that's an awesome idea, and I really hope you have a great experience doing that.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm excited. There's something about, when I was working at Demand Media, which is the company where I got to work with all the MySpace guys. And I was there with people that were hungry, that were the best at what they were. And I was able to accelerate my own growth far more than any book or other experience would have been, by being around these greats, right? And so, now, we came from Southern California. We live in a town called Redding, California now. And that's where the seminary's at. And, I look at the guys that are running it, and I'm like, man, these guys are just amazing men. Some of them came from being business owners, and now they're just doing really cool things in the ministry world. And I was like, I want to learn from those guys, right? And so just had an opportunity. Like I said, man, I saw an opportunity of like my business is at a place where I can be part-time, and so I just went for it, man. You know, I look at life as like this is a marathon. Like, you know, I use the 85 as a goal. Like I want to live to be 85, you know, and so I got 50 more years. I'll be able to use this knowledge that I get for the next 8 months, for the next 50 years of my life. I don't know when I'll have an opportunity like this, you know, where everything is kind of I can put it on cruise control in a sense, right? So I don't know when I'll have this opportunity again. So I saw it, and now's the time, man. So take it and run.
It seems like one of the recurring themes that have been pervasive throughout this interview are learning what you need to learn when you need to learn it,
Mm-hmm.
and finding the right people to accomplish the goal that you have, whether it be to build a team or to find the mentor, the coach to help you get to the next level. So when it comes to that team building, that to me is a superpower, right? Like finding the right people, building the right team in order to take your organization to where you want it to go. Can you really drill down into how you first identify those people, then how you engage them, how you first get them to join your team, and then how do you retain them over a long period of time?
That's something I'm still learning overall, but I'll tell you that the team that I have now is, you know, it's kind of made up half and half. Some were already experts in their field. All of them have a passion for learning what it is that they're doing. And so like my guy that's in paid ads, he lives, breathes, and eats these numbers and split testing and everything involved in running a really good ad campaign. My funnel developer, he absolutely, well, he's my project manager and kind of head funnel guy. So we have multiple people that do it. He loves building funnels. Like he loves reading about it, studying it, you know, learning the courses. I mean, he loves it, you know? And so I find when I try to build my team, what I look for people that love what it is that I'd be asking them to do. And then I want to make sure that they are the Batman within their department. They're the hero, right? They're not the people behind the scenes pushing me up, right? I'm the one that's like, all right, you have an opportunity to shine now, right? So I think when it comes to marketing, well, I think maybe every job, but I live in marketing, so I can speak from that experience. When it comes to marketing, a lot of times we're not able to really flex our muscle in what we know because people don't give us an opportunity to work on projects where, you know, we can see it at scale. And so the cool thing about working for the Branning Group is that we get some really fun, cool projects that we get to work on, and you know, and so they get to experience some pretty sweet stuff. They get to work with really cool people, building cool products, having fun, being creative on these marketing campaigns, and so that helps. Also, another big thing as far as retaining is, you know, for me, being able to acknowledge when I screw up, right? So one of the more toxic places that I worked, the bosses wouldn't. It was never the boss's fault, right? It was always somebody else's fault, and so that created a culture of finger pointing, right? And so here at the Branning Group, I've tried to, when I make a mistake, I take ownership. When I'm talking to the clients, no matter who made the mistake, I take ownership, right? Like, you hired the Branning Group, I'm the guy at the head of the Branning Group. That's my bad that it didn't work out, right? So since we have this culture of taking ownership that starts at the top, it's created this culture of people going, you know what, that one was my bad, you know, or also freedom to say, you know what, Alex, I built what I thought you told me to build based on the communication that we had. And so like, I'm sorry that it didn't work out, but here's why I did it that way. And then I can say like, cool, that's my bad, right? So we have a very good, healthy relationship with each other, I think, and that helps. I think if they know that they're being heard, you know, they have freedom to be creative. They know that there's freedom to fail, you know, because some things that we do don't work. And they know that like I got their back and I'm willing to take the heat if I screwed up. Like they're not going to get toasted, you know what I'm saying, if something goes wrong and it's not their fault. So but it's team building is hard because it's working with other people on a very close and intimate level. And so it's been something that I've had a very difficult time with. It's probably my one thing that I think if I was able to figure it out earlier, I would have been a little bit farther ahead, but it's all good. So we, like you said, we got to learn when we got to learn it. And so it took me a little while to really figure that out. So also paying people more than what they're worth.
So we talked about, you know, the finding the people who have the superpowers in that one specific thing, and you want them to be the Batman of that, of their department, and really let them shine. What would you say is your superpower now? You know, what are you the Batman of?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was just talking about this with my wife, actually. I think if I had to say my superpower is identifying where a business owner needs help. All right. And so a lot of times they come to me and they tell me what they think they need help in, whether it's a new website or a Facebook ad campaign. But sometimes they nail it on the head, but sometimes they don't. And so I'm able to hear what they have, look at what they're doing, and being able to, I say, you know what, I think this is actually where you need help. And so because of that, it's not only do they, because sometimes they think they have this huge, big, massive problem, but really it's just one small tweak. And so then they trust that I'm listening to them, not just going for the big paycheck. And that helps us get into some really cool places to work. But also some people come to us and they say, this is my problem. And I go, well, it's a lot bigger than that. And if they don't agree, that's cool. They can find somebody else that will do the thing they're looking for. And maybe they were right. Maybe it was just that one thing that was wrong. So I think my superpower is being able to identify the thing that is keeping them where they're at, and being able to figure out what the real solution is they need. And sometimes we cannot deliver that solution, so I need to refer them out to somebody else.
Let's get a little tactical for a bit.
Yeah.
If you're cool with that. And, you know, from the perspective of keeping this content evergreen and, you know, 500, 1,000 years down the road, if everything, you know, if things are how I envision they might be, we could still provide serious value to those who are listening, or however they're getting this wisdom. Wisdom from you, not from me. So let's get tactical. How exactly do you go about identifying that problem?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So typically when people describe the problem they're having, they'll mention the larger piece while they're mention the small thing that they think is inconsequential while they're discussing the big one. So I'll give you an example. I had a conversation the other day, and the insurance agent was talking to me and saying, I need more leads and I need a high volume. And I hear that a lot. So, and sometimes that is the problem. There's just not enough leads. And so I said, okay, how many leads did you get in the past couple of weeks? And they're like, well, I got about 40 leads. And I said, how many of those did you close? I said, it was like 3 or 4, something like that. I said, if I was able to give you 400, do you think you could close 30? And he's like, oh, I'd try to close even more than that. Right? Well, cool. But based on what you just told me, you're closing less than 10%. I don't think you need more leads. I think you need better conversion. Right? So Um, so that kind of took us on a little bit of a journey where I had said, I think, yes, I can bring you leads and we can start doing that right away. But I also think you need to hire a sales coach that will help you close these leads better, because it's going to be a constant thing where 90% of whatever leads that I send you are going to leak out and not close. And so I hope that person does hire a sales coach, because they will always be on this journey to get more and more and more leads at that rate. But another example, I spoke to a career college institute. So they help people get into new vocations. And again, people come to me for leads. So they said, my problem is leads. And they said, we just need better Google ads, right? So we need to get on the Google ads. That's where the gold is. And I was able, just while we were talking, I looked at their website, and there was like these teeny tiny little error messages that they just got used to seeing. So they were used to it. But from a consumer standpoint, that's a huge turnoff, because even though it means nothing in the overall grand scheme of things, as far as the school goes, little warnings and errors are a huge turnoff for the stability of the company. And I said, I think that's going to be a big, big problem. I think you should look at having your website team fix that, and so they were bummed, because that's a larger project than they were looking for. They were hoping I would just make the phone ring, but instead I'm like, I think y'all need to fix your website first before you pay me to send traffic to it. But it's about finding it, right? It's not about just saying yes to everything that people want from me, because at the end of the day, I want them to be satisfied with what I'm able to do. And if I do my part, but they don't get the results that they want, they're going to point the finger back at me, right? And for good reason, right? Because I just tried to say yes to them and send them, in most cases, just send them leads. And if they're not able to close them, they're going to think they're either bad leads or, There's a whole host of other things that cause those campaigns to go wrong. So trying to look at it from an unselfish standpoint, saying, is this actually a good fit for you to hire me to do this one thing?
Now, when you're going about and you're getting your magnifying glass and searching for the real problem, do you have a specific set of targeted questions that you use, or like how do you go about digging for the true problems? Like, what is it more targeted?
I know what questions to ask now. I think my sales coach helped me create a sales script to ask some of the right questions, because I was before, without knowing, I was saying yes, thinking they want this, so I'm going to give it to them, and not really knowing that I wasn't actually serving them by doing that. And so he helped me develop some questions to ask, just kind of dig a little deeper. So, like, for example, how many leads did you get last month, and how many did you convert? Because if you're habitually losing 80 to 90% of your leads, I can make the phone ring more, but it's really not going to serve you. But if you're getting, say, 30 to 40 and closing half, well then, yeah, let's make the phone ring, right? Let's do it. But it's just about knowing what questions to ask is the biggest thing, especially in the marketing world. Or let's say especially, that's the only world I know of. So that's the world I live in. That's my bubble. And so it's about asking the right questions to be able to determine if I have the right solution. Sometimes I don't. And so I'm able to refer them out to somebody else who does.
And so for somebody who understands conceptually that's what I need to do. I need to identify the problem, but they really aren't sure what questions to ask. How would you advise them to figure out what questions they need to be asking?
Yeah, that really comes down to most business owners go, I need to make more money. My problem is I'm not making enough money. And so on that journey, you really have to break down, where are your numbers, right? So this is in that book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution, as well. And so, like, let's say for the Branning Group, right? So, we're looking to make $1 million in 2019. So what does that look like? So that looks like $1 million in revenue is X number of customers. To get X number of customers, if our closing rate for our appointments is 30% of an appointment, then if I'm looking to get, let's just use round numbers, 100 sales in a month, based on my closing rate, I need 300 appointments. And so if I need 300 appointments, but only, let's say, 1 out of every 10 leads that come through become an appointment, then I need to get 300 leads to get 30 appointments to get the 10 sales. That'll get me to the revenue goal. Most people just look at the revenue and say, I just need to make more money. But really, what is the thing that you need to improve? And I actually have the book right here. I just didn't realize it. I was using it in my coaching call. So, it's about looking at the numbers from a tactical standpoint, and taking your emotions out of it too is a big thing, because like when I told the guy, I can make the phone ring a lot, but 90% of your leads are going away. And he's like, that's because they're bad leads, right? Which is maybe true, but I would talk to a sales coach first to identify, is it really the lead, or is it you just don't know how to close? Because then I could share my story about how I went to go, work for somebody else to learn how to sell, because I knew I didn't know how to do it. It's like, there's no shame in learning. You don't have to be a car salesman. You can just call these people and they'll help you. So yeah, it's just about knowing the right questions and knowing what numbers to look at.
So we've talked about so many things, and I appreciate you sharing all of that, and really going into depth on so many different things on the interview. But I want to ask about, and again, feel free to say no, but
yeah.
In your personal life,
mm-hmm.
how has that grown? Because we talked a lot about business and how that's grown. How has your personal life grown parallel to that business journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, when my wife and I first started dating, I came from a divorced background. Like, my parents divorced, her parents divorced. And so when we started chatting, I was like, you know what, when I move out to Chicago, I want to start relationship counseling before we ever go down this road, even before we're engaged. And so we dove in and we started learning how to communicate with each other, right? Because I don't know if you've heard the book, The 5 Love Languages, but that really helped us to understand where we were each coming from. So as far as my personal growth goes, I can say that my personal journey as my business has grown, that has really been impacted by my wife being able to identify different things that are changing within me as I reach different levels of business success or different challenges, and being either a good sounding board, being able to come up with great ideas on how to solve problems, and then also one of the things that I had to learn, and I learned it the hard way, was that I needed to be able to cut off, like, business is done at this time, and then being able to be 100% present for my family. And so there was a time when, I was burnt out, working too hard. I mean, I would work from the time I woke up to the time I went to bed, and I would just give my family the leftovers. And for me, because that's what I thought success was, right? It was like, we work hard, we grind, we hustle all day long. This is success. But it was killing me, and I was dying inside without knowing it. I just thought, this is just a part of the struggle, But my wife was able to call me out and say, like, if you keep going down this road, like, this is not good for you. It's not good for us. It's not good for our daughter. It's not good for anybody. And so one of the things I worked with my business coach was being able to create an ideal day. Like, what do you want your day to look like? I want to be able to wake up, at 6, do my morning devotionals, work out, drink some coffee, read the paper, and then go to work around 8:30 or 9, and then I want to be able to stop at 5, go down, have dinner with my family without being stressed out about the day, and be able to hang out, play games, whatever, right? Maybe just watch TV, read a book, right? Whatever we want to do. That's what I want my day to look like. But it's not that now, man. It's like I'm waking up at 5 and I'm working, you know. And he was like, well, starting right now, we're done working at 5, no matter what. And I was like, I can't do that. I can't do that. And so I share all that to share my personal growth really needed for me. I needed to be able to identify parameters of what I wanted to see in myself. And that's where I was able to go, cool, this is where I want to go when I grow. And so the big thing for me was being able to set time parameters, boundaries on myself for business and personal, being 100% present with my wife and daughter. And then when I focused on that, when I knew I had a place to go in my growth, then I had a finish line.
Do you find that because your superpower that you use predominantly in a professional setting is to identify that problem, identify the weak spot, and come up with a solution, the most effective solution, do you find that you're able to do that with yourself in identifying internally, what may need some tweaking or adjusting, or do you find that you need somebody else to really shine the spotlight on that?
Yeah, I never looked at it like that before, but for a lot of times my personal growth comes from, or my next personal growth journey comes from me talking to my wife or a close friend going, man, this sucks. I wish it was different. And my wife or close friend going, well, you know why it sucks, right? And being able to shine a light on what I'm doing to cause the problem. And so, so yes, I think the asking the right question, it's not really, I'm not the one asking the questions. A lot of times it's my wife and, friends that I've let, have that voice into my life, asking the right question, going, do you know why this is, or what can we do different, or what does it look like if it's not like this, and being able to help me kind of walk down the journey. So, but also me being able to listen when they say, you kind of caused this problem yourself.
So I want to take a little bit of a pivot here.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, what is your theory? The great thinkers of the world and humanity, I feel like a lot of them have like a grand theory. What's yours, and how did you develop it?
I think that's a good question, man. I'm gonna have to think about that one for a second. I don't have that answer off the top of my head. I think if I had to say, are you talking about grand theory and like the meaning of life, or what do you mean by that? Can you give me an example of a theory that people have?
Yes, I can give you an example, but I honestly think it would be more meaningful and impactful if you spoke from what initially that question triggered, because I'm sure there was maybe something where you drifted more towards, so whatever is most relevant to you from that question.
So I think overall, I think my theory about just life in general is I think the more that we focus on how we can build the people up that are around us and let them shine, then I think we all rise to the top together. And you get, when you look to help others and build them up, I think you'll find that the people around you are also looking to build you up. And it creates this environment around you where you're hoisting others up, they're hoisting you up, and everyone's rising to the top. I think when you look at who can I leverage to get to the next position, and a lot of times we don't think of it as selfishly. It just kind of becomes that, when you look at who can I leverage to get to the next step, and you have you view people as a stepping stone, and it doesn't need to be a negative stepping stone. Using the example of demand media, I didn't go into that with an idea of like, how can I leverage these guys to the next step? But that is kind of what I did. I mean, I kind of leveraged their knowledge and their experience to get to the next step, right? Not in a selfish way, just it was leverage. I was able to use that. But when you look at who can I learn from to get up, then you also become a stepping stone as well. And there's people just kind of stepping on top of each other. So I think for overall happiness and growth, I think if you look at the people around you and go, how can I help that person? How can I help that person? And you start looking at what can I do to help that person meet whatever that goal is that they have, and it's different for everyone. Some of it is personal growth, some of it's money, some of it's relationally, some of it's spiritually. It's like, how can I help with the problems that I'm seeing in front of me? Then it becomes you're now surrounding yourself with people who are also looking to help you achieve your goals as well.
I think that's brilliant, and I appreciate you sharing that. One thing I do want to ask, and maybe I think you've covered it a little bit, but maybe you could explore it in a little bit more detail. But what is your philosophy on truly connecting with another human being?
I think connection only comes with vulnerability. And I think vulnerability comes with being able to ask the right questions and, being open to answering the same question when it's asked of you.
And if you don't mind me asking,
yeah,
what does that vulnerability look like for you? Like, when do you get vulnerable, I guess?
Yeah, vulnerability is easy with it's easier with my wife because we live in such close quarters. We see each other all the time. She can instantly identify if something is off in me, right? But it's with my friends, that I have a hard time being vulnerable to. With business people, it's easy to kind of put them in. And when I say business people, I'm referring to the people that communicate with me only for business purposes. It's easy for me to kind of put up a facade or a wall, just because I've got a very narrow lane that I'm communicating to them on. They don't have a lot of voice in my life. And so, but when it's my friends, right, then, just letting them into like, hey, what's happening? Like business is great, but let's dismiss that, right? What else is going on? And being able to share, like, I feel like I'm not doing good enough on, my health, or I feel like I could be a better dad, or I feel like, I could be a better boss, or, or it could just be everything's great and I wish I could play more video games, or, what I'm saying, just whatever that looks like, right? It's like, just being able to have those open, honest communication. At the same time, though, I don't want to sound like every communication that I have with friends has to be this soul-bearing conversation. It could also be just like, let's hang out and watch the Super Bowl, and just, be who we are and have fun together. And that could be us being vulnerable, us being silly and, rooting for opposing teams together. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's just like, it doesn't need to be this, every conversation doesn't have to be therapeutic. You just be being together, and being vulnerable with each other. So, that was something I had a hard time with, because every conversation on my calendar had a very specific milestone or goal attached to it. And so it's easy to put friendship conversations in that same category of like, what is the production that I'm expecting to get out of this conversation with a friend over the phone? It's like just listening to them and being a human, so. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. It's very. I have a lot of gratitude for the fact that you would share that and go to that level with me. So I appreciate it. And I appreciate you coming on and spending so much time on the interview. And I can only imagine how busy you truly must be. But I do have 2 more questions for you.
Yeah, let's go for it, man.
Then we'll wrap this up. The first is there anything about yourself that you think is an important part of who you are that I did not ask you about? In other words, what did I miss?
That's good. I think there's probably 2 things that just don't normally come up in conversation. One of them is, my faith plays a huge role. I've gone on a journey of discovering who I am and what I believe in a spiritual sense. And that's a huge part. Another thing that really is a big part of me is being a dad. Not just being a dad to my daughter, but my wife and I were also foster parents. And so we had, little girls come into our home from very broken situations, and I was able to just be a dad to them, and talk about personal growth, man. There is nothing like being a dad and seeing these little tiny humans look to you for what to do next, for advice, for encouragement, to fulfill their need, whatever that is, whether it's a hug or food or whatever. I mean, it's just, it plays a huge impact into how you see the world.
So the last question is a little bit of a selfish question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm 24 years old, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have a couple different businesses. I work a lot. I'm really striving to go to the top. Go to the next level. What question should I be asking you that I just wouldn't be thinking about and I wouldn't think to ask, but I should be asking?
Who can I connect you to?
Okay.
I don't know who that person is or what that need is, but it's like, I need a blank. Do you know someone?
Okay. Well, that's a great question.
Because I think business a lot of times we try to get business success by striving, by building more, but a lot of times other people have the keys that we're looking for, and if we just ask, they're more than willing to give it to us.
I think that's brilliant. I truly think that's brilliant. So, Alex, I do want to thank you so much for coming on the interview today. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome.
I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and again, I'm very grateful. Very grateful.
This has been fun. Thanks for having me. I look forward to seeing it when it's all said and done.
Absolutely. So to everybody who's listening, I want to thank you too. Y'all are the reason that we're doing this. Here's my Southern coming out. Y'all are the reason that we're doing this, and I love you guys so much, and thank you for supporting the show. You guys are the best, and thank you so much. So, Alex, again, I want to thank you. You want to wrap us up real quick?
Hey, thank you, Ben, for having me on. I love it. For those of you that want to connect, feel free to look me up, Alex Branning. I'd love to connect with you on Facebook or any other platform. So it'd be an honor to meet you and see how I can help serve you.
Fantastic. Well, this has been another episode of the Project Egg Show, where we interview extraordinary entrepreneurs like Alex Branning. Have a fantastic day.
Thanks.